Last week, through our panellists here, Mark, Adrian and Ben, about 48 years or so in the business, and you can find out something about them in the program that you have. We looked at the fact that, I deduce, part of what we looked at was that humans can be defined in many ways. Homo sapiens, Homo storius would be the one I'd want to use, that we are the creatures who live by stories. We learn by stories. Our own life, in the end, we make stories out of it, various things connecting to things. Cultures are changed by the stories they listen to. The storytellers are a very important part of our culture. Entertaining, but more than that. And today we're going to look at the questions of gore, not the author, and the undead. A very learned friend of mine who sometimes speaks here at City Bible Forum reckoned I should watch that TV show, The Walking Dead, which was one of the great, in terms of viewing, the largest cable network viewing in history. My wife and I watched two shows of it and just found it too gory. It just seemed to me to be one excuse to hack and murder, to have women screaming in terror, hiding in toilets, etc. But apparently it's much deeper than that. I need to go back to verse 1. But it did seem to bring together these two things of the undead and gore. So our expert on being undead and gory is Ben. So Ben, would you like to introduce this to us?
I did get past the first two episodes of The Walking Dead, and yes, it is much deeper than hacking women up in toilets, I think you said.
And hacking the bad guys.
Yeah, that's right. There's more to it. There's more to it than that. Before I give everyone in this room a potted history of zombies on screen, we've got a quick clip to show you about movie monsters leading into the undead. So now a quick history of the undead on screen. From the first zombie film, arguably, is 1932's The White Zombie that starred Bela Lugosi. Since then, zombies have been a pretty enduring screen presence, but they really came into their own in the 50s and 60s. Notably with 1968's The Night of the Living Dead, which is widely regarded as the quintessential zombie movie. In the past 10 years or so, the undead have resurrected, whatever you want to call it, onto our screens. Hollywood's made some big films about zombies. World War Z, as we just saw the clip for there, is at cinemas now. So if a zombie pandemic breaks out anytime soon, call up Brad Pitt and he'll save the day. We've had British zombie films the last 10 years, 28 Days Later, and a great comedy called Shaun of the Dead. Australia even got on in the act about 10 years ago, a film called Undead. And for some reason, zombies tend to get themselves into weird situations. So there are real movies out there called, I kid you not, Zombie Strippers, Zombie versus Ninja, Space Zombie Bingo, and coming soon, this movie is being made, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Yeah. That clip didn't exactly illustrate it, but when zombie pandemics break out, it tends to be from a disease, some kind of disease, or radiation, say, is usually what causes it. Then how it's transferred is by zombies biting humans. Now, in case you don't know, a zombie is someone who was alive and they died and they've come back to life, but they're not actually alive, they're undead. They're effectively like an empty, animalistic, brutal shell of what they used to be, which is why zombies are often used on screen to demonstrate to us, or subversively critique actually, how excessive, how depleting, how destructive humans can be of themselves and of this world. Think of everything from warfare to consumerism that's critiqued in zombie movies. A good way to get some perspective on zombies is to contrast them with another popular movie monster, the vampire, as we saw the Twilight kids up on screen just before. Now, Twilight demonstrated to us that vampires are photogenic and sparkly. They're also eternal beings. Now, they do it in this weird blood-sucky way, but they do kinda give people life for eternity. Zombies don't do that at all. If you get bit by a zombie, you become a zombie, you are dead. Dead. All they do is, like if I was a zombie and I'm going to attack Ian, I'm just going to rip his life out of him. Done. Boom. I just take life. That's what a zombie does. So then, and with what we're about to discuss on this panel, I hope you've got many questions about it, what do zombie movies tell us about us? About life, about death, about the afterlife, about hope, about eternity? What do zombie movies tell us? For example, is the best post-resurrection experience any of us could hope for after death is to come back as a brain-dead, brain-munching, killing machine? I'll leave you with that question because we're about to discuss such things.
That's right. So you come back as a rugby league player, much as I love it. I love the game, played the game. But don't forget, friends, we'd love to get your own SMS questions or Twitter. The details are on the inside of the program you've got and will occasionally appear on the screen. Well, Adrian, you've listened to your colleague make comments about zombies, undeadness. What would you like to contribute to that?
Firstly, I think Ben needs to set up a wiki page on zombies because you've got it all down pat, the chronology. My take on zombies and vampires, I think, is that any film that talks about death tends to make us think about life. And I go back to a series like 6 Feet Under. Does everybody remember 6 Feet Under, the HBO program? Probably showing my age, about 10 years ago or something. It went for 5 seasons, and it basically each episode was about someone dying, and then it went through and talked about what their life was about. So I think when we watch zombie films and vampire films, I think our cultural DNA is we want to know what happens after death. So I think the films, particularly zombie and vampire films, well, not so much the Twilight films maybe. I don't think they make you think much about anything, but anyway, that's just my personal opinion. The zombie films particularly, I think, make you feel what lies after death, what's after the apocalypse, where are we going from here? It's kind of a cultural DNA thing. I think everybody would like to know what happens after they die. So,
you eat people's brains.
Not perhaps. I think in cases of films like World War Z, it's looking at kind of a total apocalypse and what happens next. So, also, I guess as a Christian, for me, the whole idea of us being created in the image of God, a zombie is everything that we aren't in humanity. Like a zombie has no feeling, has no compassion, can't be hurt, doesn't have a soul or a heart, for want of a better word. And so in some ways they're kind of like what we would be without God, because they're nothing. They're kind of a shell. They're a sort of meat without the inside, I suppose.
Just the horrible idea of a zombie sandwich.
They don't talk either, do they?
No.
I was shocked with World War Z that they've evolved to moving fast, which apparently happened sometime. Because I thought in the past you always had a chance because they were slow.
That's actually a deliberate change, because the original book, which is basically a New York Times bestseller, actually still had them stumbling along.
Okay.
But Hollywood went, it's nothing terribly threatening about something you can evade on a bicycle, which is actually what was happening in the book. People were going, quick, grab the bikes. And they were gone, But the point, and I think actually Ben captures it well, the point of the threat of zombies was that they do not stop. So there's eternal life on view. If a vampire never dies, and a zombie never dies. Like until the cartilage wears away, there's still these bones dragging themselves around. So in the book World War Z, which the whole thing was based on, the nations fall not because they can't blow them up, but because even after they blow them up, they're still crawling along, and even crawling, they can push you into the sea. So that's the idea. I think the whole idea, and I think you're right, the whole idea is to think about death. But what it's saying about death is a really interesting thing.
It's the freaky thing with the ones that I'm not a connoisseur of these things, but the freaky thing about them is that they seem to be unstoppable. They seem to be, in the end they can be stopped, but for most of the movie, these things are just unfeeling, unthinking, unstoppable. There's something. Why do we pay to go and see movies about something that is so relentless?
I'm not really sure. Actually, I'm not, like, you think about zombie movies, it's difficult to pull them apart because there's a real template to them and they're just the same movie all the time. It's always about outbreak, survival, hopelessness, death is coming at you unrelentingly, it won't stop unless you take its head off, and then it's still going to come at you anyway, the end. And they're pretty much all variations on that theme. Yeah. So I think we go, with what you guys are saying, I think we go because we almost like to get that close to death but not, and we like to kind of flirt with death and think, oh, what an interesting scenario if like real death was coming to get me. But you don't have to face it in your real life. So I think like a lot of horror movies, people like the thrill of it. They like to be that close to something that they know they can't control, they have no control over themselves. But if you go and watch a movie, in 2 hours, Brad Pitt will take control. and sees the day and hopes won by Brad Pitt. Sorry to ruin the end of the movie for you. That may happen. May not happen. Yeah. But I think it's about the you can control death in those situations as a viewer.
No, I'm going to disagree with you there, because actually I don't think it's about control at all. I think it's about holding in abeyance. Okay, so this is the thing. Zombies
as a viewer, or
no? Well, I mean, the storylines. Your villain, your character, is one that cannot be defeated, and even if we can eradicate the disease, it might break out again at any moment.
Yeah.
If we do the wrong thing, if we start eating monkeys, who knows? It's just going to somehow spot up again. So that's why I think it's about death, because it is about pushing back the barrier that is inevitably going to get us and hold it at some distance. Look, zombie films are life lesson films. I know they're like there's hack and slash versions of them. But you look, every zombie film we've got, we will come to a point where somebody says, but something survives. What is it? Love? Hope? Some sort of confidence in each other? If we stick together, something is going to be rarefied out of this cauldron of death. But it can't all last. And so we just go, let's hold on to each other. Or let's hold on to, well, you saw them taking out the Bill of Independence or something like that. In The Walking Dead, the comic book series which spawned this, they were all about holding on to liberty and democracy. I mean, so, yeah, well, great. I mean, and chainsaws. Chainsaws were helpful as well.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It is all about being out of control as well. There's very chaotic sort of nature to those films where it's all about, banding together in a community against, pushing back the foe and not really being able to do much about it.
Other than survive.
Yeah.
There's a few questions have come from the audience. One says, hello, Ian. Hello. The other is suggesting that it's really about what we do when everything breaks down. Is there any truth in that maybe these films are about what happens when all the niceness of civilization goes? Will you still be a decent person? Is that part of the story?
It sounds to me like you've watched more of the Walking Dead TV series than you said.
No, that's a question.
No, that's what the Walking Dead TV. It sounds like we're now going to plug the Walking Dead TV series
hopeless.
all the way through this. But don't listen to it. Actually, it is very gory initially. Yeah, be warned, it's very gory early on. But I think the shock value dies down of the show, and it does become just about that of what do people do when confronted with the apocalypse, which is always what happens in a zombie movie, is just boom, like everything gets decimated and all you can do is survive. And then what do you do when hope is gone? And a lot of zombie movies, they're so condensed that you never really feel like hope is gone. The Walking Dead, however, over the course of a couple of TV series, has this bunch of characters that you get introduced to that I think they've got a lot of great ideas and saying a lot of powerful things about how people try to band together and reform civilization, things about leadership, about children, about how you're going to raise people, morality, ethics, all of these things re-emerge once you take their civilization away from them and effectively force them together and force them to survive.
So you were talking about being human, the question that the zombies raise, Adrian, but it sounds as if this question, and you're saying that it's also about our humanity, the humanity of the not dead.
Yeah.
So it's also asking that question: are we going to be proudly human, or beautifully human in the midst of horror?
Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing too is from a cultural and societal point of view, I suppose. The zombie films tend to appeal to a certain age group. Would you agree? It's probably 20 to 30-year-old males.
Yeah. Can I say probably also unmarried, but that's a whole other thing.
That's
people
a whole other
without
thing.
kids don't tend to like to go to films where people get cut up and killed. Sorry, the other way around. People with kids don't tend to go to those films, just statistically.
And as
they don't like to see, they go, oh, the guard, his mother must be so upset. Like it's that sort of thing.
And as a genre, it cuts across films, video games. There's many video games about killing undead.
What do you think
Sony seems to bring one out every
Why is that? Why do you think people want to play video games where they get to shoot other people? Is it because it's better because they're not people anymore, but they look like people?
I think so. I think
the
there's kind of that.
been solved.
The monster element is definitely there, but also
even though they look like a human, though, like you still know you're killing a human, or you're not because they're. Like, you see what I mean? Like they're still in the human form. It's not like. It's not like some nebulous, some crazy beast that's coming after you. It's another human. That's what I find interesting about Walking Dead is the way people get desensitized to these are still people that you're killing.
Desensitization, whole interesting issue, I think, societally. Like, there's a school of thought at the moment that says, and I don't want to go into the violence creates violence discussion, but just briefly, I think because there's a generation of particular age group that's growing up with these games and movies, and Hollywood is kind of feeding that with these sorts of stories, there's developing what is being coined the empathy deficit. So I think as people play these games and realise they can just hack and slash humans, even though they're seemingly monsters, there's a whole element of, if you play these things often enough, you tend to lack empathy. You'll do things without empathy. So there's this whole area of cultural exploration at the moment about how there's a generation of empathy removed from things.
Let me add to that. I actually have, this is not a sympathy plea or anything like that. I have two lovely boys who I love very much who both have neurological conditions. And we learnt a lot very, very quickly, and it's affected the way I look at films now about how the brain works. And a long time ago, we used to think of the brain as basically like a complex Swiss watch. If you've got one bit broken, well, that's it. The whole thing's not going to work properly or whatever. But neuroplasticity is what neurologists talk about these days. A brain's more like Lego. You can rearrange the pieces and use a different piece here to make that function still work. That's why they talk about neuroplasticity when you talk about pornography addiction. Because you're rewiring your brain by putting in certain types of things. You're literally changing neural pathways by habitual exposure. And the same goes for violence and lack of empathy, which is why it's not unwise to think very carefully about the effect, the literal chemical effect watching violence actually has on your brain. Do it enough, and I've seen people's personalities change. I have two friends who I love dearly whose whole attitude to life has become angrier even as they've delved into this style of film.
So there's a question here from the audience asking, are these films and films like them fundamentally unhealthy for humans?
Great question.
Great, yeah, really good question. I think we said last week, I think anything that you watch over and over and do over and over starts to form a pattern. I think for me, I don't have a tolerance for these sorts of films. Can I say that up front? I think anything that's rated MA, I kind of tend to. You've got a warning label on the front, which is my kind of thing about discernment. So you go to the movie theatre and you see that it's rated MA and it has sexual references and gore and whatever else. So they do tell you up front before you walk in that this is what you can expect in a film. So my take on these sorts of films is I will go and see them if there's like a touchstone, like World War Z was one of the ones that kind of is changing the genre a little bit. But I've probably watched a couple of episodes of Walking Dead and
that's enough.
That's enough for me. But yeah, I think you can. It's like anything. The Bible says, what you take in comes out. So. Yeah, I would probably go against it.
It talks about what's in and that comes out, and so I think you're right about individual sensitivities.
Yeah.
The caution with setting up the front here and saying, well, don't watch any zombie movies or don't watch, like, despite the fact I'm wearing a sweater that looks like Freddy Krueger, I'm not here to say watch Nightmare on Elm Street. That's not what I'm doing here. But I think
nice touch, by the way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I see you guys didn't dress up, but hello.
Haven't you seen Nosferatu?
Nice. But I think a great example in this is a movie like The Exorcist. That's rated R. I've seen it a couple of times. This isn't me telling you to go see it, but I think The Exorcist couldn't be what The Exorcist is without... It's got blasphemy in it. It's got really difficult scenes of horror and violence in it to stomach. But for my money, it's arguably the best movie Hollywood's ever made about spiritual warfare. About spiritual warfare. Like, go to Ephesians 6, look at the first half of that chapter. It talks about spiritual warfare is going on. People don't want to talk about it, but there's good and bad. We all like to go watch movies about good and bad. The Exorcist has that right then and there, but it demonstrates it in a way that goes into the spiritual realm, which I think is amazing. And I don't think they could have made that film, that story, without the content in there. So that's not me telling you to go see it. That's just saying, well, what do you do with that? Like, should we never watch movies like that and interact with them?
I absolutely agree. And I think my thing, like, as always, is consumption without reflection is kind of
Consumption.
not great.
Well, self-destructive.
It's just consumption.
Yeah.
So
Excess.
And I think there is a case. I believe there's a case for seeing films because, like we said last week, for those of you who weren't here, culture reflects back to us what humanity believes often. So the stories that we were talking about last week, they're reflected back at us all the time. We need to reflect on those, though, I think.
Yeah, like does World War Z point to this is what people think, like they've got in store, like this is all we've got to hope for, is that maybe a zombie pandemic will break out, and then we've got to go save ourselves.
Because you go to the cinemas for a number of reasons. I mean, you go for yourself, you're going to relax, you can see your friends. I don't know.
Do you relax in a zombie movie?
Well, you see, this is the thing. I'm not sure I would take my wife and say, hey, date night, let's go see World War Z.
Didn't you go see that Warm Bodies, the romantic comedy zombie movie?
Yeah.
Hello.
Zombie rom-com.
Did you go with Maya?
It was a rom-com and that's how it worked. You see, she got the rom-com, I got the zombies.
Rom-com.
I've got to say, though, that
Thank you.
we go to the pictures for a lot of reasons, and one of the reasons we go is to understand what's going on. I mean, some films, like Adrian said, I would go to see just because, but some books I read just because everybody is talking about them. Now, my perspective as a cultural reflector is to actually understand what is going on in the culture. And I personally believe that zombie films are tied with our rise of new atheism.
Hang on, sorry. You think that?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Really?
Put me out there on the wild edge.
Wow, great.
But basically, when you look at the time frame, you'll see that they pretty much marry up. Okay, I mean, Hollywood is in the business of getting an audience. Okay, let's not make any mistake. They're not making films deliberately that don't sell. That makes no sense. When you see a rise in films that are of this nature, you know that they think that people are thinking this way and they're feeding into a curve. In fact, actually, the producers of The Living Dead were excited over the fact that they could produce it because they'd been pitching that idea for about 10 years. And they'd never got near it.
Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead. Yeah. And so, but television finally allowed them to get there. Now, the reason why, in my aspect, is because on the one hand, you have vampires are about a very cool eternity. Yeah. About us all enjoying the best things forever. I don't like the way they get
Hang on,
there.
sorry, I don't want to... Cool. So if I can just interrupt with a question.
Yeah.
Isn't that the more recent take on vampires? I thought that the cool vampires is a fairly... I thought they started off quite dark and
1932
two-dimensional.
Nosferatu, you've got basically Bela Lugosi giving us the almost resurrected corpse, of vampires. Sitting very much inside of culture as we understand it.
So they used to come out of coffins, didn't
they? Yeah, exactly. They were the damned. Okay, all the deals done were the damned deals. They'd done a deal with the devil, or they turned their back on God. That's why they were. They were a sign of people whom even death and the portals to the afterlife had refused. Right. So they were stuck. This was not a blessing. By the time we get to, Stephanie Meyer, they've actually turned into hyperhuman beings with the best dressed sense, more money than anyone, and the ability to swan around and live life perpetually in high school bodies. Why you would do that, I don't know. But anyway, it's just that.
But they're vegetarians.
Yeah. But I want to draw a distinction. Well, not all of them.
Damn.
Some of the cool ones have decided that meat's not so bad. Blade, for example, you look at those sort of series, or anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, we've transitioned. We're not looking at vampires anymore. Vampires were 2008. That was their peak. Okay, and now we're coming down the hill, and what we've had instead in 2012, 2013 is the peak of zombies. And zombies are about death comes and there's nothing left to resurrect you from. You try and come back from being a zombie, the only people, you watch this, there'll always be some sucker who says, but it's my mother, or it's my wife, or that's my child, and they're on the menu. They're the people who will be eaten within 5 minutes because they don't realise that death is death and that's it.
But really, aren't you slightly overstating it though?
Because I'm a writer.
Well, we're talking about World War Z, Zombieland a couple of years ago, now Walking Dead, which has been very successful on the small screen. But I don't think we can call that an outbreak of zombie movies or zombie TV. I disagree with that. I don't think every horror writer in Hollywood is sitting down saying, "We've got to write a zombie movie." I just don't see that.
I'll go as far as to say that novels certainly, I mean, if you have a look at what is actually coming out with Bloomberg and others, those films that were about the teenage vampirehood have now shifted over to the teenage undead.
So I'm a teenage vampire now.
Well, no,
I'm a zombie. I'm a teenage zombie.
How about the new series that's coming out, The Sack of Bones? Does anyone get the title? That one's coming out.
No, that's the other one.
No, I know it's the other
something
one.
about bones.
But yeah, that is based on a teenage. Watch teenage fiction in terms of books. Watch what happens. It's a bleeding edge to this sort of stuff.
I mean, I kind of agree with you because World War Z, not to keep plugging the film, is a definite attempt to bring zombies into the mainstream because they don't eat flesh. They just tend to bite everybody and keep running. So it's kind of like this infection rather than...
They are the less gory zombies, aren't they?
So it's kind of... It's been an attempt to kind of mainstream zombies, whereas The Walking Dead is...
what comes out of it.
Yeah, whereas The Walking Dead is very much the old school zombie thing where, they like to have a bit of a meal.
Of your brains. Of your brains.
So there's kind of... that, for me, is a bit of an indication that they're wanting to bring it into the mainstream by making a mainstream film starring Brad Pitt, of course.
Yeah, look,
but you're saying there's an actual message behind the zombie film?
No, I'm saying that they're reflective of a culture.
Right.
Okay, so atheistic... look for God in the zombie films. There's always this sad character on the edge who is saying that maybe this is God's will or we should get something from this. And in the new orders that they create, no one is saying, and where are we going to put the church? Okay, what they're saying, the ultimate argument for no God is zombies. If you can create a universe where, if God can allow a universe to exist where mum can actually eat her own son, which happens in World War Z, not in detail, you just hear about it, but if that horror can actually occur, well, then there is no God. Now, the fact is it hasn't occurred, but there is, it's one of those self-affirming statements. If this horror, if a tsunami can occur, if a plague, if Ebola can exist, there is no God. And it's the same argument.
Okay.
Yeah, there's kind of the... World War Z does have the kind of hope element to it as well.
Any apocalyptic film.
Whereas...
But it's always very human-centric, isn't it? Like, humans are going to do this. It's all about humanity.
Humanity surviving.
No one's putting up prayers. No one's holding vigils.
No.
They're like, no, we'll get Brad Pitt in and he'll save us.
Whereas I think things like The Twilight, was it Breaking Dawn Part 2?
I don't know, Adrian. Was it Breaking Dawn Part 2?
Was that what it's called? It came out when a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it really came and went.
Yeah.
And,
it missed the curve.
And I mean, for me, the whole the Twilight series was more about superhuman bouts of abstinence rather than anything to do with the afterlife. They just waited before they got married, and then she wanted to become undead with him for the rest of her life. It's kind of a really tragic love story, if you want to put it in today's words.
And the thing that's missing, the other thing that we haven't talked about after death stuff is ghosts. Whether or not the zombie thing is just looking at the physical body with its appetites that goes on living, whereas the ghost part of human storytelling, I don't think it turns up in all that many movies. I suppose, Sixth Sense and all that stuff.
You're talking about
but the ghost
late
is
80s, early 90s.
Yeah, that's a spirit thing, isn't it?
Well, early 2000s, a lot of those Japanese horror films, like kind of The Ring, and the American remakes, The Ring and The Grudge and stuff.
Yeah.
But they were always destined to die off.
That's always been in Chinese, Japanese culture. I think if anything, they just saw a market and went, oh, that'll work, and pulled that across. Yeah. But I think we had a really interesting, debate. Oh, you guys should have been there. 5 minutes before we started. Do vampires have souls, or do the undead have souls?
All the big questions answered today. Do vampires have souls, Mark?
Well, but I guess I'll give you guys your chance to say. But I actually think it depends on the author you're talking about. But we've done away with the soul. Ghosts are a product of something that lasts after.
Yes.
And in terms of the big undead themes at the moment, we're not talking about anything, or if they are so far removed from us and gone that we're never going to be in touch with them again.
It's kind of sad we don't have more ghosts because it does reflect a spirituality that, as you guys are rightly saying, zombies just don't demonstrate. So what's an easier approach to life after death? We'll just have a zombie because a lot of people must think that's all that people are good for, right? Like once you die, that's it, you're just this flesh. Yes. Whereas a ghost would actually suggest there's something more. So there's the spiritual component to ghosts. And also the other thing is, they're not that threatening. Ghosts, really. They just
cause
like that.
Fun. Yes.
What are they going to do?
They tend to scare people to death.
They do. Like,
Now, so if I can go.
Yeah, please.
Just someone to go back to the question of violence. Someone's asked here: is film violence really any different to, say, a few thousand years ago, retelling the story of Achilles and Hector, or Is there any difference between watching violence and hearing of it told in a story? Because it's hard to find too many serious lines of stories that don't have some sort of struggle, fight.
A lot of early fairy tales have violence in them. If you read some of the Grimm brothers' tales, they're pretty grim.
Is that where we get the word grim from?
I think it probably is.
Look, I'll take a stab in the dark and say, unfortunately, no. I think you'll find that the grim is a Nordic word that springs from ghost.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was very helpful. So, film violence.
It's the nicest put down, seriously.
It's hard to answer that question in a way because we're surrounded by violence. You watch TV, you see violence on the news. There's violent video games, and it's hard. I guess it just goes for me for a question. Goes straight to the moderation thing.
Yeah.
Again,
You're getting close to there.
I don't know.
Can I say actually that there is a huge difference in what is happening in a story, or for that matter, in many films, and then what we've grouped a whole lot of things together here, and I think it's probably fair to say there is a big difference between horror and gore. Okay, so horror is what Hitchcock does in the bath scene, which we saw, in Psycho. You don't see the blade go in; you see blood go down. So it's your imagination that is doing the work, and that is horrifying. Stories often work on horror because basically, Bram Stoker's Dracula is asking you to imagine these things, not describing them in blatant detail. Gore, which I think we've seen a rise of pretty much in the 20th century and up, pretty much mid, 1950s and onwards. That's a problem, because that, I think, has got more to do with desensitizing. So I see no trouble in being horrified about death. I think that's a natural response. We should be horrified about death and what comes next and what might happen. But gore, that's just missing the boat. We're taking it 90 degrees and getting into some splatterfest.
And you talk about catharsis also, like the kind of the physical action of going to a film, going to a horror film, and being shocked and screaming and all that sort of thing. You can do that from the in your lounge room. You can watch a film and you can be shocked and all that sort of thing, and you don't have to actually physically have to go through that in real life because it's being done for you.
Which is what storytelling always did. It was pass on wisdom.
Yeah.
So you've experienced it sort of second-hand.
If you don't experience it, the story doesn't work. If you don't, the fundamental rule of storytelling, one hero who we can identify with. Lots of films shipwreck on the basis of having too many heroes, too many characters, thinking that they're spreading the demographic, but actually all they're doing is weakening the lesson, because that works for you, but it doesn't work for me, but that sort of stuff. One hero who we can identify with is the key factor.
I was asked some years ago whether or not the whole Christian story of the resurrection of Jesus was a zombie thing, because
zombie Jesus.
Because in some of the discussion about Jesus' resurrection just being a spiritual thing, the enduring influence of a good guy, people have noted that the word resurrection literally means to stand up again. So that when it talks of the resurrection of the body, it literally means the standing up of the body, which, when you've seen a few zombie movies, does sound like that. Now, you haven't had any time to prepare for that, but how would you want to... I remember when I was asked that question, is fundamentally at the heart of Christianity is a zombie story. A man who was dead, who is now undead.
You take this one, Adrian, I think.
I find that problematic.
That's a good response.
So do I, that's why I asked.
I guess because the gospel story is about renewal and restoring us back to God and things like that. So the zombie thing for me is an absence of anything that that even relates to us in our form as the image of God. So I can't. It's hard for me to.
Okay.
I don't think I've thought about that hard enough.
You can come back to Ben. You've got any reflections on whether or not what's the difference between the Jesus, the standing up of the corpse? Is that what that literally means? The standing up again of Jesus' body, and the zombie concept. It doesn't come from the resurrection, because that comes from Haitians, that place like that, I think, in the Congo, the idea of the zombie originally.
Like voodoo.
Yeah,
I think it
and
comes from, yeah.
where a witch doctor takes control of someone's body for a while. But it's...
I just simply put, Jesus was God as man, and he, after his resurrection, was still God as man. And so a zombie is just not even really man. Doesn't have, as Adrian was saying, the image of God within that man. It's just human, just a form. But Jesus, God as man, divine soul, spirit is in Jesus. So to describe Jesus as a zombie, I just think it's not based on evidence about Jesus after he rose from the dead.
He doesn't bite Peter and Mary.
No, he doesn't do that either.
Let's just destroy that idea on the basis of motivation.
Yes.
Because the truth is, like a zombie is anti-life. I mean, it is opposed to only one thing, and that is anything healthy and anything happy and anything in front of us.
Right.
Jesus comes back, and what do we find is his motivation? He turns up so that he might bring us life, so that we might be one with the Father, so that we might have a body like his that will go on forever and not perish. You know, it's just such an opposite end of the scale that's why when you first said it, I had to laugh, because, you know, you couldn't see Jesus trying to take from anybody when what he's in fact always there for is to actually give.
I like your take on it, actually, that it's kind of an atheist view of the world, in a way.
Yeah.
That it's sort of very nihilistic and there is no point. And
even if there is a reality in these things, it's so far removed from us that we can't do anything about it. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we're running low on time now. We don't want to go over time because we want the wheels of the economy to keep turning smoothly. Let me just read one statement from Jesus from the last book of the Bible, the wonderful book of Revelation, where he says this: "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead. And look, behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of death and the place of the dead." So it is interesting. At one level, Jesus is undead, but he stands and says, "I live forevermore, and I am the living one." And I guess in this constant quest we have about the chess. If I thought you were going to say that the zombie movies were chess players, because
on large scale, I suppose they could be a chess game. Yeah.
Because in the end, the inevitable thing that thoughtful people are aware of is that we've got this chess game going with death, and we can delay it and protect ourselves and hide. And I remember, some of you may remember when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work became famous, and her work with dying people and how people dealt with it. She got children to draw pictures, and I remember seeing this on television, and it's still quite a moving image. She had this little kid who knew he was dying of cancer, and he'd drawn, when she was asked to draw a picture, they drew a picture of a big tank with its gun facing low, and there was a little stick figure of a kid holding a stop sign. And when Dr. Ross asked what it was, the kid was saying, I'm the kid. And this sort of unavoidable, he's been checkmated. And I think there is the possibility in Jesus of someone who claims to know what's after death and to actually have gone into the belly of it and to have come back, not just undead, but almost more alive than ever. And as the great Bible teacher Allison said, he doesn't eat flesh, he eats fish, because he has to convince his disciples he's not a ghost. So he does a few things to show that he's not a ghost, which is their presumption of who he is. So we hope you've enjoyed today. There's a few more things.